The following is a talk by Professor MM McCabe from the second evening of Leeds Love Month 2003 on the topic of love. In the talk, explores Plato's portrayals of love in the Symposium. Their presentation was preceded by one from Professor Troy Jollymore and followed by a Q&A, and both are also available as podcasts. Leeds Love Month was organised by the Centre for Love, Sex and Relationships at the University of Leeds, and we hope to improve relationships by studying intimacy. You can follow the Centre on social media for news of future events and publications. The talk series was generously funded by the Society for Applied Philosophy.
I wanted to start by thinking about what I call the hallmark. I was worried that hallmark doesn't exist anymore. Does hallmark still exist? They make sort of disgusting cards, you know? They're kind of really gross. Yeah. So I want you to think about tacky slogans for talking about love, right? So you could talk about togetherness. Or you could talk, this is something that really gets up my nose, about my other half. Or you could talk about being inseparable. Or you could talk about being best friends forever, or something that Luke just said, you could talk about, you make me a better person. Those are odd expressions, it seems to me. They do capture the idea that love is a relation between people. But they do it in a slightly wonky way. And I want to use Plato as a hallmark person, and then I'm going to show you that he isn't really. That's the idea. Okay, so that's the hallmark stuff. The other stuff is platonic love, right? So everybody said, oh yeah, platonic love, well, platonic love's no fun, really, because it's love but no sex. Or it's love that somehow or other transcends sex. Something kind of weird and strange. Or else maybe what it is platonic love sort of stands in for friendship. It stands in for something where, a situation where there's no question of sex, right? So it's a jolly good thing, and sex is on some other page. So I wanted to look again at what we might think about. I'm going to talk a bit about Plato, and I'm really sorry that I'm going to talk about Plato, but he's really good. Okay. So I'm going to talk about two different things. I'm going to talk about platonic love, which is what one discovers from his dialogue, the Symposium. And this is supposed to be the good bit of Plato, right? It's supposed to be the bit that everybody likes. It's beautifully written. It's sort of exciting and interesting, and all sorts of things happen. If I have time at the end, remind me to tell you a story about a conference on the Symposium that I went to. But that's for later. Okay, so Plato's Symposium is, as it were, the nice face of Plato. The Republic, on the other hand, is the wicked, anti-democratic, ghastly autocracy, mad metaphysics, mad epistemology version of Plato. So people say. So the Symposium is part of the approved bits of Plato, and the Republic is part of the disapproved bits of Plato. And I'm hoping to reverse that, and I'm hoping to reverse it by getting you to think about pronouns. Your heart ought to sink at this point. Here comes a philosopher standing up talking about pronouns. Anyway, I hope this is going to make sense. So I want to know how any of these takes, particularly the take in the Symposium, deals with the fact that love is a relation. Whatever it is we say it is, and I completely defer to what your saying about it, Troy. But whatever it is, it's a relation. And I want to figure out what it would be for something, some attitude, some emotion, whatever it is, to be a relation with somebody else. And I want to know whether, when we think of it as a relation like that, whether it's a relation that's about me and mine, or whether it's about me and you, whether it's about one person or two people, whether it's covertly all about me, or whether it's actually about two people, and how we would explain that. Even when we've understood what we think it might be, what about the other person in all of this? Okay, so here is a story. So Greek's good at stories. It's a Greek story, so there's some gods in it. So you have to not worry about that. Okay, once upon a time, this is a story told by Plato, as told by the comic poet Aristophanes. Once upon a time, human beings were spherical, and they had two lots of everything. So they had two lots of arms, two lots of legs, genitalia twice, pointing in opposite directions. And they were very, very strong because they had all this apparatus, right? You know the Isle of Man, where the Isle of Man they used to, if they needed to go somewhere fast, they just rolled because they had feet in all the right places. I've never quite worked that one out, but that's the idea. Because they were strong and self-sufficient, we'll come back to that, they got uppity. And here comes the God bit. They said, oh, we can manage everything ourselves, don't need any gods. Yabu sucks to Zeus and Hera and all of those chaps. And Zeus and Hera get a bit annoyed, and they say, no, hang on a minute. So they cut them down the middle so that they now only have two legs, two arms, and one set of genitalia each. Interestingly, the genitalia are distributed in asymmetric ways. So some of the original people were both men, some of the original people were both women, and some of them were one man on one side, as it were, and a woman on the other side. He only has three possible combinations, but you can imagine that there might be all sorts of other ways to capture that kind of, it's not gender fluidity, but it's gender pluralism, if you like. Now, the idea is that when they get chopped down the middle, they go, bah! And they are very, very upset and miserable. And they go around, they get sort of sewn up and so that they function, but they go around the world looking for their other halves, right? And eventually, if they're jolly lucky, they find their other halves and, not to be too graphic, absorb themselves into the other half so that they become whole again. And that explains all of their aspirations and interests, that instead of being parts, they're now a whole. Okay, so they're not round really anymore. They're just two-backed, but whatever. What this is supposed to do, according to Aristophanes' account, is to give us an account of, with the plural gender stipulation, gives us an account of why we are attracted to other people in particular. Because there are other halves. But think about what that's actually like. So I said at the beginning that we need to wonder about what it would be for love to be a relation between one person and another person. If the two people are just parts of a whole, and there's only really one whole, that strikes me as not being about one person and another person, but just one person, right? That looks to me as though they would, to talk about pronouns, they would both say of themselves, I. And they, of the joined together thing, if they've got time to speak at all when they're joined together, they're going to say I, because all there is one person there. After all the sound and fury about gods and chopping people in half and rolling round and round, actually we haven't got anywhere on this account in explaining what it would be for me to care for somebody else, because all it boils down to is me. Aristophanes, actually Plato didn't seem to like Aristophanes much, because he thinks that Aristophanes was responsible for the death of Socrates in part. So it's reasonable that Aristophanes' view gets replaced by somebody else's. So there's a whole pile of other people that say some things. And then we get the bit that Troy describes, where Socrates and Diotima have this conversation. And the account of the conversation, exactly agree with Troy's account of it. What happens is that you're sort of muddling around in the world, and you see a beautiful, in the context, young man walking down the road. So you see Charmides, who was one of the most beautiful young men of his generation at the time. And Charmides walks down the street and you go, oh, he's beautiful. I'll have that. That's how it's thought of. I'll have that. So you get a bit of Charmides, and then Alcibiades, who is one of the most beautiful young men in Athens, walks down the street and you say, oh, he's beautiful. I'll have him too. Now, what's going on there is that actually it's not about Charmides and Alcibiades, it's about the bits of beauty in them. And the thought is, the moral psychology is, if there's some beauty out there, in some of the ways that sometimes people are imagined to think about goodness, if there's some beauty out there, I'm going to have it. I'm going to kind of collect it together in this huge pile of beauty. And then you discover that actually bodies are so passé. Minds are the thing. So you go, ugh, I don't want to have anything to do with Charmides and Alcibiades anymore. I'm going to go for Protagoras and Gorgias because they're smart. And so you collect together a few sophists, and then you discover that they're all a bit rubbish after you've got all that beauty. And then you go to the beauty of mathematics, and you assemble some mathematics somehow. Until in the end you discover that you're able to see the form of the beautiful. Now, first thing is that the form of the beautiful is clearly a thing. It's clearly thought to be some kind of entity. But you end up in this procedure, first of all accumulating, then changing your point of view to something that's a better version of the beauty of the previous thing, and then just focusing. Now, if you think about what's happening in all of these discussions, there is nothing about Alcibiades or Charmides as persons. All there is the good bit. Alcibiades is pretty, Protagoras is clever, Pythagoras' theorem is really cool. There is nothing that registers the significance of the other. All there is this focus on the properties of the people, or the assets, if you like, of the people that are kind of part of this excitement. Platonic love is that. right? That, or at least that is the so-called view. By that time, of course, sex has gone, right at the bottom. We didn't, once you've got fed up with Charmides and Alcibiades, no sex with Pythagoras' theorem. It doesn't work. But it's also not about persons. It's about this view of something that the persons represent. Now, what I want you to think about is the distortions that both Aristophanes' account and Socrates' account, and the dangers of both Alcibiades and Socrates' account. Both of them, as it seems to me, are heavily exploitative. They're not. By thinking about them, you see something about love, it seems to me. You see that it jolly well shouldn't be like that. You see that if what love looks like is the obsession that Aristophanes talks about, then we've missed something. And you see that if it's the rationalization or the focus that Socrates talks about, then everybody else in that process has been exploited. So while Aristophanes makes us think that the stuff about the other half, the hallmark, oh, it's my other half, actually it's seriously creepy, right? The Socratic thing is equally creepy because it's deeply exploitative. Now, I put to you that Plato noticed that, because one of the things that happens in this extraordinary dialogue is that we notice that these are stories told by somebody else to us as we read them. And each story is replaced by another. Each story is overturned by its successor. And one of the things that Plato then gets us to do is to notice what it is that's going wrong. When Socrates finishes explaining all this stuff about, the good and the beautiful and gosh, golly, I'm going to sit there and just look at it. The most beautiful young man in Athens called Alcibiades turns up and he's completely hammered. And he comes in, like this. And he's variously a reprobate. And he says, Socrates, you're over there, but I love you, but I can't stand you. And there's a whole sequence of descriptions of what it is for, it's very, very moving passage, of what it is for Alcibiades to love Socrates. And Alcibiades' claim is that actually they each love each other, but they love each other in ways that treat each other as an object. What happens is that Alcibiades says, Socrates, take me, you can have me. And Socrates goes, okay, let's have a conversation about philosophy. And Alcibiades goes, that wasn't quite what I meant. And Socrates says, well, then I'll go and talk to somebody else about philosophy. I don't care. And one of the things that Alcibiades' speech brings out is that this kind of move objectifies in a completely horrendous way. So what I'm suggesting to you is that the Symposium has these three stories. The first one is you're my better half, you're my other half. That's the first one. The second one is I'm going to sublimate everything and look at the good or look at the beautiful. And the third one is this kind of desperate obsession in which the other person does not have any standing. I want to suggest to you that what Plato is illustrating to us in those three stories following one after the other is something that I want to call erotic injustice. What it is if you think about the parallel situation where somebody suffers from horrible prejudice. So supposing somebody suffers from horrible prejudice, you can imagine that one of the things they suffer from is a kind of silencing. Now, I think that Socrates' version, or Plato's presentation of these different stories about love, is designed to make us understand something about erotic injustice, the kind of injustice where the other person is not a person in their own right. They're just either an object or a possession or another part of you. There is nothing in any of those discussions of love that allows for the first person plural. It's all I and never us. Okay? So what I'm suggesting, so my first move is to suggest that actually the Symposium story is the story that tells us something about love going wrong because it doesn't have this version of itself that comes from the right kinds of pronoun. The Republic, on the other hand, now, you know, those of you who've read that, you probably read that, if you've read The Republic, you've gone, it's long and it's kind of complicated and there are some good bits and there are some rubbish bits. I don't believe this myself, incidentally. And there's all this stuff about the governance of the ideal state by the elite philosopher, and this is what people say, kings. And that's terrible for all sorts of obvious reasons and some unobvious reasons. However, the moves that are made to get that conclusion, whatever one says about its politics, which I leave for another occasion, are bracketed in the middle books of the Republic by a slogan which reappears over and over again. And the slogan is, in Greek, it's koina ta philon, which means common are the things of friends, right? So there's some things in there, and there are some plural friends. So you say, oh, well, you know, old Greek bloke says things like that, doesn't mean anything. I think that's not right, and I think what he does say about it is illuminating. I give you very quickly 3 moves that he makes. Philosopher kings, you say. Famously, there are philosopher queens. So there is a move that he makes where he says, well, you know, are they all going to be blokes or is it going to be women as well? Think about common among friends. In the first place, the things that are common are taken to be women and children. So in the first place, women are objectified, as are children. But the question about philosopher kings moves them from being among the group of things that are common to becoming a friend. He says, well, you know, women aren't very strong, so they won't be able to do the strong things, but they can still think, so they can still be rulers. In doing that, he very carefully moves the role of the woman away from the object place in the sentence to the subject. So the women, the queens, have as much stake in the friendship as the kings do. Am I making sense? So the idea is that if you think about us as friends, each of us gets to be in the subject position in a sentence, okay? Second move he makes is to imagine that there are conditions under which, if we are a collective, so if we can say of us that we're we may have the same feelings and affections, so that we feel the same thing at once. So there's something to be said for what it is for us to be in the subject position. The third move is what rectifies what I described as erotic injustice. Because the relations between friends are the relations that Plato describes as, they're intellectualized for sure, as giving and taking an account. If you're my friend, I must both give you an account of whatever it is I'm doing and hear your account, right? Under those conditions, we can't help but be an us rather than an I. The conditions for friendship in Plato, that is to say, don't suffer from this problem of injustice because they require each of the parties to the relationship to hear each other. I think once we start to focus on the boring philosophical question about pronouns, you can see how the move away from the discussion of love towards the discussion of friendship gives us something that looks like justice. I think it's explanatory as well. I'm going to pick up something from what Troy said, and I'm going to cheat because I didn't think about saying that. This is about the love of children. I'd like to say something very quickly about the metaphysics of pregnancy. It's a weird thing, pregnancy. You just have to believe me. It's very strange. And one of the strange things is the pronoun. Is it me or us? It might be me for a long time. It might be both. It might shift. My experience was that when my children were born, they went on being me for quite a long time, and then they were us, and then suddenly it reverted. It's unstable, that relationship. And so one of the things about that, I can't answer to paternal love, but for maternal love, it confuses the question about how the pronouns work. So my overall thought is, maybe it seems to an awful sort of minor thing to say, but I think it really matters that we pay attention to the pronouns, and whether a theory of love ends up with I, bad, or we, then if it's a we theory of love, then it's got some mileage in it. I'm going to stop.